Welcome to Public Forum, a community outreach program produced at North Idaho College on the shores of Lake Coeur d'Alene. Featuring guests from around the globe addressing a wide variety of subjects, Public Forum serves to educate and enlighten. Please join host and moderator, political scientist Tony Stewart, in welcoming today's guest.
We're so pleased to welcome you to today's program, and one of the subjects that's of great interest around America, and in most states certainly record this, and that is dealing with oral history. The history of a state is extremely important, and to record people while they are still alive, and that is what our program is about today. We're so pleased to welcome to the program Troy Reeves. He is the oral historian for the Idaho State Historical Society. He comes to us with certainly the credentials to discuss this subject. As I've indicated, he is the oral historian for that particular society. He has conducted around 200 interviews with Idahoans, present and past, and he also has the credentials academically. He holds a baccalaureate degree from Idaho State University and a master's from Utah State University, as one might expect, in the field of history. It's his majors. Troy, it's a great pleasure having you here today and to talk about what you do and some of the history of Idaho.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And I'm so pleased to have visiting as a panel member our good friend Judy Meyer. She is the former chair of the Idaho State Board of Education. She's on the Board of Trustees at North Idaho College, and in the capacity today, she's certainly serving as the Idaho State Historical Society board member, and Judy was responsible for our guest, and thank you very much, Judy.
Happy to share.
And equally important to have Erna Reinhardt, who's our Director of Public Relations, on our panel, and we will invite Judy to start today's questioning.
Thank you, Tony, and welcome, Troy. It's fun to work with you, although I don't work with you as directly as I might like, because as a member of the board for the Historical Society, we're working on setting policy with our director, Steve Gerber, and I think you've had him here before to help tell the story as well there. And thank you for that, Tony. Today, probably, Troy, we would have you start off to tell us a little bit more about what an oral historian does, and in that, during this time, we'll probably also then weave in what the Historical Society does. But let's start with the oral history. Oral is O-R-A-L, right? I was thinking about that and thinking oral, when you hear, is A-U-R-E-L? How am I doing on my spelling? But they both work, don't they, for oral history?
Yeah, they certainly do. And people have debated that oral historians, O-R-A-L and U-R-A-U-R-A-L, have debated that over time. An oral historian, at least oral history for the Historical Society, we try to do three major things. The first is we gather oral history. So we go out and conduct oral history interviews. Part of the reason why I'm here this week is not only to tape the show, but also to conduct 2 oral history interviews for a current oral history project we're working on. So we go out and gather oral history.
All over the state?
All over the state. The second thing we do is we preserve and provide access to those oral histories, because you're not going to do anyone any good if you just gather it without having mechanisms in place to not only preserve it, but to provide access. And we provide access both via people who come into our research library and also people who visit our website. And then lastly, we educate. We strongly believe in the mantra that if you just give someone a fish, they'll eat for a day. If you teach them how to fish, they'll eat forever. Another reason why we believe in that mantra is there is 1.5 of us in the oral history staff trying to do oral histories for 1.2 million Idahoans. So I think you can do the math that doesn't work very well if we don't get people around the state interested in either helping us preserve or helping us gather or even helping us educate about oral history.
And so when you do the education part of it, for instance, what do you do, or how is that done?
Sure.
So how can folks be part of this?
Sure. Education is just what I'm trying to do right here. Education can also be one-on-one if, say, a high school student or a college student comes in and wants information about oral history to do an oral history project, say for a National History Day project or for a senior seminar paper. We also do 45 to 60-minute lectures on either topics, oral history projects that we've done, or kind of a brief primer on oral history. We also do a 2-hour mini workshop and a half-day workshop.
And where are those done?
Those are done whenever someone calls me and says, Troy, I need you to do an oral history workshop for me.
But the reality is, how do we fund that?
Right. And that's why we have been able to hook up with the Idaho Humanities Council, and I'm on their Speakers Bureau. So people can request me through the Speakers Bureau of the Idaho Humanities Council, and then if they're willing to pay the fee to the Humanities Council, then the Humanities Council pays for the rest of my travel
As I
expenses.
recall, that fee to the Humanities Council is kind of an honorarium sort of thing in the amount of...
Amount of $50. So
high price.
yeah.
Invaluable.
Yeah.
So I try to do workshops throughout the state, but it is mainly when people find out about me and are interested in having a workshop done.
And so when they want to contact you to do this now, because we're getting them all fired up,
That's
do
right.
we have a website information we can post? Both, I guess you can recite it, and I think we can post it on our screen for
We'll have
folks
the
to write
staff
down.
put it up right now, and then if you will also
Okey-doke.
verbalize what the website is.
Sure, it's www.idahohistory, and that's all one word, .net.
And
And
that
that takes us directly to the Idaho State Historical Society website.
Which then leads to all
Yes.
kinds of things.
Yeah, which then leads to all kinds of things outside of oral history. It leads to our information about our archival collection, information about our historic preservation activities, information about our historic sites, which we have throughout the state.
But we must not forget our viewers who don't have computers.
Right.
So there's a telephone number.
There is a
So would
telephone
you be
number.
so kind as to give the
I
telephone
certainly
number?
can.
And we'll let our viewers get a pin on the, and we might repeat later, but give them the number
Sure.
now. I know it's area code 208.
It certainly is. Area code 208-334-3863. And that's the direct line to oral history.
We're going to repeat that again because some people like me and I write slowly. So it's
Sure.
334-3863.
That's correct.
Thank you very much. Erna?
Troy, welcome to the show.
Thank
It's
you.
great. It's an honor to have you here. Share with us specifically what is the Idaho Oral History Collection, and give us some examples of what someone might find in that collection.
Sure. We have been an official part of the Historical Society since May of 1978. And at that point, we called ourselves the Idaho Oral History Center. We're now going to become confused because starting in November, late November, we're going to actually have an Idaho History Center, which is almost completed. So we haven't decided in the Oral History Department. I say we, me and half of me, haven't decided whether we're going to, start to just call ourselves the Oral History Division. But anyway, the point of it is that we've been an official part of the Historical Society for over 25 years now. Fortunately, oral histories had been done before that and became the backbone of our collection. So we have interviews as far back as the late 1950s, a bulk of interviews from the late 1960s and early 1970s. So what that means is that we have stories and memories from people from the late 19th century throughout the 20th century and now into the 21st century. So 3 centuries worth of memories, if you will. There are over 3,100 interviews in our collection, comprised of well over 50 key projects, which can be mining, immigration, women, politics, culture, environment. We've tried to do as much as we can in terms of the whole milieu of Idaho history. And also we've been fortunate that people have donated oral history projects that they've done either on the county level or the city level, or individuals who have done oral histories for a class project or for their own edification have then donated copies to us. So we've been very fortunate that way.
And you are located in Boise. If you didn't live in Boise, is there other ways to access that information?
Yes. Through our website, you can at least access most of the narrators that we've interviewed, and either at the very least a name and an oral history number. On some of the newer collections, we've been able to use the web to provide summary indexes for the information that we've interviewed, and also audio clips, anywhere from 30 to 2.5-minute audio clips from specific interviews. We have tried to do that. We've also linked up now with the Library of Congress through what they call their National Union Catalog of Manuscript Collections. And so we have key information about almost all of our interviews on their website as well. So we're trying to do the best we can to get out outside of Boise for people to find out about us.
Thanks.
I can't resist this. When I was division chair for 14 years, we had a wonderful history professor here by the name of George Cook, and he did oral history interviews, and that collection went to our library. But I was informed recently that it's been given to you in Boise, and I'm delighted about that because you have expertise, and they said it would be preserved and be more accessible. So we are one of those contributors in that way.
Yes.
Now, Troy, I'd like to ask you a question that you'd ask a parent: which is your favorite child? And with my humor, that is, you've done a lot of interviews, and I'd like to get into the substance for our good viewers about what some of those are. Would you share with us some of your favorite interviews, or give us some inkling into what the individuals talked about and,
Sure.
and how far back that went. Because I know some people you interview are very elderly and they can take you back a long way.
Certainly. A couple that stick out in my mind here right now is I interviewed a former forest firefighter. One of the projects I did several years ago tried to identify former smoke jumpers and former forest firefighters. One here who lives in Potlatch, his name's John Krebs. Did a couple of interviews with him, came up here when I was doing outreach, and a fabulous man who spoke not only about his forest firefighting experience, but also talked about forest management policies, which I think is very prominent throughout the state, at least in northern Idaho and in central Idaho.
And I assume there'd be some changes over the years in that management
Yes.
in his lifetime.
And that's exactly the great thing and the powerful thing. One of the powerful things about oral history is you can talk to people who have long-term ties to a topic or a project, and you can ask them, what are those changes over time? And the smoke jumpers and forest firefighters were very vocal about those changes over time and had no problem telling me about them in detail. Another person who sticks out in my mind is a woman from Pocatello. Her name is Tessa Butler, and her husband teaches in the anthropology department. He may be retired now or maybe emeritus, teaches in the anthropology department at ISU. She, during World War II, I'll backtrack slightly, about 2 years ago, we interviewed women. It was called our Women in World War II Oral History Project. So we interviewed women either who were here on the home front, served in the military, worked in factories. Well, Tessa Butler, from the age of 9 through 13, was in Holland. And her town, a little island, was eventually taken over by the Nazis, which is not an unusual story. The unusual part is that her family was at the time harboring 2 Jewish girls who they had given basically false identities to. And Tessa would, her house, it's difficult to explain, but her house was on an island, and her house was the first house, and so the Nazis took over that house because it was a prime location. And then they would find out information about the resistance fighters or the Jews that were hiding in the houses, and they were going to go raid them. Well, Tessa and others would find out about that, and Tessa, at 12 years old, would jump her jump rope to the gate and try to get through. And the Germans would point their machine guns at her and say, "Nein, verboten, verboten." And she would talk to them in German, saying, "I'm just a girl, I want to go jump rope with my friend who lives in the house across the way." And they would keep saying "Nein, verboten," and she would keep stating that. And they would let her through, and she would go to each house that was going to be raided and warn them that the Germans were coming. And I asked her, weren't you scared? And she said, no, that's, what we did. We didn't want the Nazis in our country, so we did what we had to do to get them out.
So that just shows an example of the richness of this whole collection.
Right.
Judy?
Thank you, Tim. As I listen to these stories, I think then when you say oral history, you really are just going to get to hear people's stories. Do you ever do anything with written word and stories that way? And then that would lead to the whole genealogy question of how that weaves into what you do.
Sure. We accept memoir. People who have written down their memoirs. It kind of,
as I remember it.
right. That kind of starts to fall into our oral history or our manuscript collection. We do also accept oral history that's been done and transcribed, but all they have now is a transcript, and so we don't necessarily have the human voice, but we have the record of the interview. So we try to accept as much primary source material as possible.
Primary means the original.
Right, some sort of original document, whether it be an oral history interview or a memoir or what have you. In terms of oral history and family history, we have a very extensive family history or genealogical collection at the Historical Society at our research library. And I've been working with the librarians who focus on that there, and working with the people who come in either by giving presentations to try to get them to think about conducting oral history with their family members while they're still around, as well as doing that research of the family members who have long since passed away. Part of the best days on my job, actually the best days I have on my job, is when someone calls or emails and says, I hear you have an interview with so-and-so. That person was my grandfather, and my kids never got to hear his voice. And fortunately, almost every time we have a copy of the tape. Sometimes we don't. We have a copy of the tape and hopefully a transcript, and we're able to give them a copy.
And when you say you give a copy, I assume the State Historical Society keeps the original materials. that folks give you. But if someone wants to give you something and still maintain some control over it also, is there a way you can duplicate or arrange for that kind of sharing with you, but also let the family maintain their history?
Certainly. And we can do that in terms of oral history on the release form, or we do let people who have donated collections to us come and make copies of it. With oral history, depending on how direct it is, sometimes we charge a fee for duplicating the tape or making the copies, but people that I interview directly, I offer them a copy of the tape and the transcript as soon as it's done, to immediately hopefully give their family something tangible for their family history. But the best days on the job are when those people call and I'm able to give them a tape or a transcript, and almost invariably they always call back or email back, expressing such joy that they were able to bring back, in a sense, a family member for their family who had never seen them or heard them.
Reinhardt.
Share with us what current project you're working on.
Actually, two current projects we're working on. One is the Capital Oral History Project. The Capital Commission has generously gave us some equipment, and what we've tried to do over the last few months and what we're going to try to do during the legislative session is interview mainly long-term either employees of the Capitol building or long-time legislators. And it doesn't necessarily even have to be a long-time legislator. We're trying to get their thoughts and memories of the Capitol building as a way to help preserve that building, particularly now that the dialogue has been going over the past few years of what exactly to do with the building. And that's been a lot of fun. And actually, I think a legislator here, and I don't have my notes with me, but does George Saylor is?
Northern Idaho
I'm going to
legislator.
be I or one of my interns is going to be interviewing him when he comes down for the legislative session. So it's a way for us during the legislative session to be in Boise, but to interview people from outside of Boise. The other project is Proposition 1 in 1994 here in Idaho. Was a proposition designed to codify, if you will, policies regarding homosexuality. It was a policy that piqued my interest back in 1994 as a young, soon-to-be graduate student. I thought it would pass for sure, and it didn't. And so I kind of always have kept it in the back of my mind as to why it didn't. And so I had an opportunity with the 10th anniversary of it to interview hopefully 4 to 6 people on each side, trying to get a balanced perspective of the proposition. And that's what I'm actually doing here. I've interviewed one person on each side up here to get a Northern Idaho perspective on Proposition 1.
Excellent.
What happens, I'm sorry, to follow up then, Tori, what happens with these projects? You've gone and collected this, then what
Certainly.
happens? Where do we
Certainly.
go with it?
We try to create a summary index at least, and eventually a typed transcript. Then that information goes into our research library, also goes into our research library's collection management database. And eventually, too, we try to do a web presentation. It may be fairly simple, it may be fairly complex, depending on how much time I have and how much time I'm able to work with our computer person. But again, that's a way to try to get the information outside of Boise as quickly as possible. But we do, as I said, gather and preserve. We gather, but we not only just gather, we try to preserve and also provide access too.
Thank you.
Modern technology is so remarkable for not only you, but for families to be able to introduce to future generations someone who's passed away, in addition to the any documents you get, and I know you have a lot of audio. Do you also use video?
We accept video at this point. We haven't done a lot of video oral history. Mainly the reason is, again, I sound like a broken record, but with a staff of 1.5, I feel strongly that even though video technology has shrunk the camera, it will be better if there's a videographer and an interviewer as opposed to one person trying to do both. With audio technology, I could sit the audio tape between the audio recorder between the two of us, and I can kind of glance down at it and make sure it works. If something doesn't work, I'm quick to adjust. If the video camera's behind me, I start thinking about, well, Tony's moved. Is he still in the shot? Do I need to go back and look? And I have lost my focus as to what I should be doing, which is listening to what you have to say.
I guess this is a commercial ad, but at some point in the future, hopefully there'll be funds available to give you more staff, because preserving history is just so crucial. And we often hear the statement, too, in relation to public policy, that if you don't learn from history, you're condemned to repeat some things you don't want to repeat. That anyway, it's a wonderful thing. I would like to ask you about education. That's such interest, K through 12 in colleges, and particularly social science classes and all. How much are you able to assist the schools around the state with their history curricula?
Certainly. Just recently, I gave one presentation to a class at Boise High School in their history class, and they are going to have their students interview veterans as part of the National Veterans History Project, which we at the Historical Society are an official partner of. I've also been working with another school in Boise, an independent school, working with their students this summer. They have assisted me greatly in the Capital Oral History Project. I've given presentations here in northern Idaho to both K through 12, mainly 9 through 12, and colleges, and I've done the same in southeast Idaho. Again, I try to be as proactive in that as possible, but a lot of times it's when a teacher or a student contacts me. At that point, then I try to grab onto their leg as tightly as possible and not let them go until I've spouted whatever wisdom I have about oral history and hopefully have converted them.
Is this a good or bad idea? You know, you're trained and you've done like around 200, and there's a secret to interviewing and getting the kind of information you want and have the subject relax and all, and you've told some beautiful stories, but is it feasible for you to, particularly faculty members or people who have some training, to train them to go out and do interviews for you? Mm-hmm.
It would be completely feasible, and I've given presentations to teachers in the Boise area, and I would love to give presentations at if there are teacher in-service conferences in other parts of the state. If there were teachers or educators, whatever, who are willing and able to, and I would actually rather do that. Again, it's that whole if we can get teachers interested in conducting interviews and also conducting enough that they feel competent and secure enough to pass it on to their kids, then they are helping us, as a whole.
Our friends in the Idaho Education Association might be interested in taking that on. I will speak to them about that. Judy?
We've talked about you doing oral history because you're the one person in the state at this time who's designated through the State Historical Society to do it. And you've talked about doing workshops. Is that about the amount of training that's needed? We might start with the training you've had. Tony's described a little bit of what you've done, but you've had OJT on the job training. But in addition, you had some college preparation for this sort of thing. What do people do if they like oral history and want to go that direction? Right.
I took a class at Utah State called Folklore Fieldwork in their folklore program, which was basically oral history. It was take a story or a topic and interview people about that. And there I received training from a folklorist at Utah State. I'd also had done oral history interviews at Idaho State to get my bachelor's degree.
Were you interning then?
No, that was part of my senior seminar project at Idaho State.
But you've mentioned that you use interns also.
Yes.
Is that another way for folks
It certainly is. It certainly is. And another way as well is that we sell what's called a field notebook for oral history, and if I would have been smart, I would have brought one and we could have plugged it
We'll try
nicely.
our oral history. Tell us about it.
But again, that's part of the education. We sell it for $8 plus sales tax, and it actually goes into more detail than I can go into in a 4-hour workshop. And we've sold thousands of those over the 25 years that we've been publishing it. It's now in its 4th edition. So that's another way we try to get information out to not only Idahoans, but to people throughout the region who find out about the field notebook. So my training was, to be honest, a lot of it was on the job. A lot of it was just thrusting a microphone in front of somebody's face and hopefully doing enough proper background research to ask some good thoughtful questions, and not just the standard, tell me about your life question, which can elicit a lot or could elicit nothing, depending on how the person thinks or feels about it.
I have to interrupt to say this. We had a wonderful gentleman here one time. He had an incredible history, and we were going to do 2 shows with him, and he had been in the war and all. And at the end of the first show, we got through high school. So I thought, how are we going to get the rest of his life in one show? I remember Steve Sheik being here at the time, and he looked at me like, this is really going to be... So you have to be trained in how to do that. But you certainly impress us with that knowledge. Erna?
We don't have very much time left, Troy. We have a few minutes. But let's say that someone wants to preserve their own family history, not so much to put into a library or a state collection, but just for themselves. Give us a few tips on what makes a good interview.
Certainly. The first thing is to get to know the subject. And in family history, a lot of that has been done for you, because you should hopefully know your family, and you probably do if you have the interest to actually, preserve it through oral history recordings. The second is purchase, I'll use the word decent equipment, and that also involves having an external microphone if you buy a recorder instead of just the internal microphone inside the tape recorder, because it just casts a wide net of sound. It doesn't know where the person is. So it gets a lot of background noise, which makes the sound quality not as well. The last thing, there are several more things, but one more key thing is actively listen to what's being said when you're asking, after you've asked the questions. Don't just hear, listen, and that's the one thing I try to pound into these students that I talk to. It's more than just hearing. You actually have to listen, because the best questions you're going to ask are follow-up questions that you ask based on what has been said, not what is on your topic list when you walk in the door.
Great advice.
You must, as you do all these interviews, you must find that some families obviously are more interested in their family history than others, and sometimes the elder members of the family, they pass this down through stories, and other families, that's not the case, and you have to capture, I assume, with the elder person before they pass away. I assume there's a real difference from family to family.
Mm-hmm. It certainly is. And we don't do a lot of life histories, but the ones that we've done, it definitely, there are some families that you can tell that history has been a strong facet of their life, and there's some families that have just started to kind of grasp the idea that preserving their own history is probably a good and proper thing to do.
We're just now out of time, but I am going to say to the viewers again, if you'd like to get in touch with our guest on Oral History in Idaho in Boise, the number is 208-334-3863. Troy, it's been a pleasure having the program. You're highly informed on this subject, and we thank you for taking time with us, and good luck in your work.
Thank you. Thank you all for having me, and your questions were great, too. It's always fun to be on the other side of the equation.
Well, we're not as trained as you in oral history. And I want to thank our panel and Judy Meyer again for getting us our guests. It's been a wonderful show to do. And ladies and gentlemen, I would like to invite you to be with us again next week at this same time when we'll move to yet another issue, as we do most weeks. Until then, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
Recorded on the campus of North Idaho College, Public Forum is the longest-running in-house college production on PBS. Each episode is pre-recorded live and is an educational outreach from North Idaho College. Please join us at this same time next week for another edition of Public Forum on this public television station.